So yeah, can you tell us about your background and what drew you to philosophy?
Well, honestly, philosophy arrived after I went to university as an undergrad, and I thought I wanted to be a business major because, I was a teenager trying to figure out how to make money, and I didn't want to work as a cook forever, right? So initially I'm like, ooh, I'll be the manager. And I'm like, this is boring. So I went to business school for a semester and I knew that that was not what I wanted to do, but I still wasn't sure. So at the time, this was back in the 80s, my mother used to teach design at Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island for many years in their night school. And she was working on her master's degree in in art history. And so she's like, well, maybe you can come to school with me. So I'm like, okay, I'll go from business to art. And I'd always been a doodler and a drawer, but when I got I was taking a summer class at RISD, and I was the dunce of the class, right? Because like there were these students, avant-garde, wearing black turtlenecks and stuff, but they were making paintings that looked like photographs, and I'm using like not crayons, but something in between crayons and chalk, and like and I could tell everyone I was the only person with perfect attendance, and I was the dunce of the class, swimming in the deep end of the pool, and it was kind of humbling because I really, really tried, but I didn't have the drawing skills, and Lester Abrams was this guy who was teaching it, who did the illustrations for The Hobbit back in the 80s, and he was a really good teacher. And it was fantasy illustration. I'm like, so I can't do business, and now I can't do art. So I transferred to a state school, and I got locked out of all the classes. And I'm like, okay, I'll be a math major because I liked how I was always pretty good at math, and I like how math doesn't change, right? Uh, and it seems like it's true independently of whether we think it's true. And then I took calculus, and it was so hard. I had to spend 5 hours a night calculating limits. And I'm like, and I struggled to get a B in that class too. And so I'm like, all right, now I don't know what to do. I can't do business. I can't do art. Math is really, really a little bit too hard for me. I mean, it's not too hard, but it's just the amount of energy and time. And so I was signing up for classes, and all the other classes were filled. And I took an Asian philosophy class and an ancient Greek philosophy class at Rhode Island College in 1986. And I was like, wow, I didn't know this was a thing. You could actually study philosophy. So I kind of wound up on philosophy by accident, but I've always been very curious about why people believe things are false, and so yeah, and I found out that it spoke to me. Uh-oh, there's someone at the front door. Who could it be? You'll have to excuse me momentarily. Is it the mailman? No, it's Plutonic Rocks. That's my orange cat, Pluto. He knocks on the door when he wants to come in. But anyway, so there's not like I didn't know I wanted to do philosophy, but I've always been kind of curious about stuff, and especially the limits of human knowledge and our own facts as well. So,
What areas specifically are you interested in?
well, I've done a lot of work in ethics and the history of Western philosophy. I probably the most significant thing I did is write this peer-reviewed book in 2005, Becoming Nietzsche, about where Nietzsche got his ideas from. And actually, I was at the World Congress of Philosophy, and someone's like, wait, are you Paul Swift? I'm like, no one knows who I am, but I've met some Italian and Japanese grad students who say, yeah, that helped us finish our dissertation. So I have a specialty in Nietzsche's philosophy before he meets Richard Wagner from 1866 to 68. And I'm not a great scholar, and I'm not very good at languages either. But I was lucky to find this particular series of essays that most people didn't know existed by Nietzsche. So I was kind of lucky to find these texts that hadn't been published in Germany since 1940 when I started the book research. And And I translated some of Nietzsche's early writings into English for the first time, where he got his ideas from. But I'm a generalist. I wound up doing a lot of different things from teaching environmental philosophy to ethics, history of philosophy. I teach Asian philosophy. So I'm not I have a narrow focus and expertise in Nietzsche's late juvenilia, but yeah, I do a lot of stuff. But yeah, so nothing too flashy. My
Mm.
cat is meowing here.
It's fine. We cannot hear him mouthing.
Okay.
People think that philosophy is abstract. Can you give us some concrete examples? And especially how it could help us to navigate our current crises?
Yeah, yeah. Someone save us, philosophers, maybe. Yeah, philosophy is abstract, right? But there's an entire orientation of philosophy, like pragmatism, which tries to understand philosophy in terms of its use value to make a difference in the world. And many people ask that, like, okay, don't tell us descriptions of God, freedom, immortality, and all these things that are unmeasurable, or are they just ideas? But how do we make a concrete difference? So if I understand your question, I mean, maybe you're referring to contemporary dismantling of democratic institutions in the United States. And that's a tough one, especially since we've seen things like, the president go after the Harvard for their funding and stuff. And yeah, this concerns me a lot. And as a as someone who is trying to help people think more critically, I don't want to be a sort of advocate, like just telling people think this. Ideally, I hope my students can draw their own conclusions. However, that being said, if I were in Germany in 1939 as a university professor, I think I would kind of, I think like the role of a public intellectual that philosophy is often associated with, not so much in the United States, but maybe in France and some of the other European countries, the idea that it makes sense to push back against forces that try to subvert independent thinking. And I mean, it's such uh, a weird example that our current president, of course, had to pay what, a 25 or $26 million lawsuit before his first term for running a fraudulent university. And so it's almost like, I'll get back at you. I'll attack all universities if I can't have a university. No, and so I'm concerned with that. And I've lived in America most of my life, and I hope that eventually that president will be gone. But I'm concerned about the future of higher education in the United States, and I think everyone should. But it'd be a mistake to think that philosophers have some special insight that other people don't. I think, right? But yeah, how does philosophy make a difference? That's a tricky question, right? But I think I like philosophy because it challenges people to think about some of the most difficult topics where you may not have a consensus of experts, right? So if I'm trying to understand, I don't know, how mold bacteria spreads, there's science that is verifiable, but and so some things can be empirically researched, looking at data and repeatable experiments. Uh, and often people, I think, of philosophy is like, oh, you can think whatever you want. But that's not true. Philosophy and science both have the same goals of aiming toward what truth is. And I ran into someone a couple Halloweens ago who's like, oh, philosophy, that means you can think whatever you want. No, one of the branches of philosophy is logic, which evaluates arguments, right? And that's not a subjective thing whether an argument is good or bad. And I think philosophy has lasting value for that, right? Because if sometimes you see things politicized, if you've ever tried to buy a house or a car, right? You go in and there'll be a price for the car and you'll say something, you'll haggle, right? And say something well, I'll give you X amount when they want 2X, right? And so people wind up taking positions that they know they don't really hold because they think there's a give and take of haggling, right? And so when it comes to public policy, I mean, philosophy is about finding out what the truth is. And sometimes you might double down on a position politically when you know it's not even true, right? And so this is one of the things that I'm concerned with, the idea of truth being politicized so much, because then people haggle back and forth. But I think there is a way the world is, and it's hard to know what that is. But we use arguments and reason to try to back up claims to see if we can get closer to the right picture of the external world, the world in which we live. But anyway, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think philosophy can be used to push back against politics, for example,
Yeah.
and help people understand uh, that arguments are important for establishing what we ought to believe. So, for example, 10 years ago, there was still a lot of climate change denial, right? 20 years ago, even more. But at some point, what are the arguments? What are the sources of credibility? I think philosophy is really good for those reasons because it's designed. Good philosophy is like a BS detector. BS is a technical term for things that are knowingly false, right? And so anyway, I love philosophy, but I also recognize that it's super challenging, and often people do think, oh, it's abstract, and philosophy is abstract because it deals with ideas and trying to figure out what makes sense. So in my view, the best philosophy, I mean, has to be compatible with the sciences. And I
Mhm.
teach environmental philosophy. Maybe about 4 years ago, UConn said, "Hey, Paul, can you teach at Avery Point environmental philosophy?" And I'm like, in like 30 or 40 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, or 50, I mean, environmental philosophy wasn't even a thing, right? In the history of philosophy, right? It's a response to rapid industrialization and destruction of our environment. And so it requires like a different kind of approach to thinking about, okay, what is reasonable public policy? But it's really challenging. I like philosophy because it's challenging because I'm trying to understand the sciences, right? How much forever chemicals are the right amount in our environment, right? How dangerous are they? Things like that those questions. So trying to understand what we can get from empirical science is very important, especially if you're going to make claims about public policy and what is a reasonable amount of pollution in which parts of the environment. So anyway, learning about law and science, I enjoy learning. So I think that's probably part of the reason I got into philosophy. But it is a challenging, it is challenging, right? Because it's not like you can just go, okay, part of the reason there is a philosophy is there's something that people don't agree on. And it's not just because they're not well informed, but sometimes don't have a consensus of experts. If you
Mhm.
look at, right, for example, physician-assisted suicide, it's illegal in my home state of Connecticut for people who have a terminal condition. But there are state laws in Vermont and Washington and Oregon. There's quite a few states, and reasonable people can and do disagree about what would make good public policy. But I think philosophy, I mean, that's always been a controversial issue, not just in the 21st century, going back for centuries. There's more than one way to look at uh, things like should there be state sanctioned help for physician assisted suicide or should it be illegal, right? So I think meaningful philosophy should be able to weigh in on those sorts of questions, right? Um, but it's important to know the facts, though, right? Facts are important.
Yeah, yeah. Every time I meet you on campus, Paul, I always hear about your very innovative teaching. Because, yes, you teach very abstract and very difficult concepts to our students, but you always do it in an interactive way. You do videos. You told me about the Connecticut troubadours. So tell us about your way of teaching these difficult concepts.
Well, maybe this is a deficiency of me as a teacher, but I don't want to bore my students. Like that's the last thing I want to do. Like so, and I might be guilty of substituting sensationalism for rigor at times. I might be my own worst critic, but it is difficult to teach philosophy in a way to make it accessible because it's inherently challenging. When I was in college in the 80s, there was a very famous physicist, Stephen Hawking, who had this book, A Brief History of Time, right? And if you didn't understand physics, here's a book and it would teach you stuff like, okay, well, the universe is expanding like a loaf of bread in the oven with raisins, where everything gets further apart. And then you walk away with, oh, I think I understand how the universe works, even though I only understand this metaphor. But one of the advantages of some of the discourse of science education is there's a model and everyone kind of agrees on that model. Like, all right, like how do we create metaphors, even if people can't follow all the scientific arguments? How do we explain it in a way that's accessible to everyone, right? And there's actually, it requires being creative to think about the sciences in that way. But with philosophy, creating like a metaphor or a model, like do we have free will? Yes, no, right? Do we have a right to physician-assisted suicide? No, yes. So there's a lack of agreement. So I think it's easier to do pop science education than it is to do pop philosophy education, right? And there have been a few presses that there's a series of books called Open Court Press, and they try to make philosophy accessible, right? So they have things like philosophy in baseball, or I actually contributed an essay to their philosophy in the Beatles volume, right? The Beatles, the rock group. And the idea is like, okay, suppose someone's not really into philosophy, but they're into the Beatles or the Grateful Dead or baseball or poker, and they have different people write essays that try to introduce them to different topics. And so I have mixed feelings about that because it seems like it doesn't seem super rigorous because it mixes pop culture with philosophy. However, it does make philosophy more accessible to a broader audience. So I love the cartoon in the first 20 years, The Simpsons, and they had The Simpsons in philosophy, right? And no one buys philosophy books. But when that book came out, they sold something like a third of a million copies of it, right? Because people, oh, is Homer Simpson virtuous according to Aristotle's ethics? Why or why not, right? So I think that there's a value in trying to figure out strategies to try to explain some of these more difficult concepts of like some of philosophy's oldest questions, such as what is the nature of the beautiful, right? The good and the true, right? And so ask people to think about like to what extent is your personal perspective biased? To what extent is your cultural perspective biased? Is there any sense that we can strive to have a less biased view of the world, right? And I think that's the operative goal of philosophy, right? To get the world as it is rather than just how it appears to us, right? But anyway, yeah, so I don't know how to make philosophy interesting, but I'm trying by using things like live action role playing games or sometimes I use music in the classroom. Most philosophers don't do that, but years ago when I got my PhD in the 90s and I was living in Pittsburgh and people I was in a band would say, hey, they started sending me recordings of my own music. So I came out with this record, Love of Wisdom by Aardvark Spleen, which is that's in Greek, love, Sophia. I'm sorry, Philo, Sophia, love of wisdom. And so I tried to make a philosophy record. And so some of it works as philosophy, but most of it doesn't. And musicians say, "Why are we playing such abstract music? This is terrible." And then my philosophy colleagues, why are you making philosophy records? Write another boring philosophy book that no one will read." But anyway, so I try to bring philosophy and music together. I don't know if I'm entirely successful at that, but I think it's a good. Even if I fail at it, I'm committed to still doing it. So I was lucky. We had the Buddha's birthday in early April. In Japan, they celebrate Hanamatsuri, which is Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha. In Japan, they have a flower festival for that day. And so I brought in Kayla Farnham, who's our Connecticut state troubadour, to come play a few songs because I got a few songs about Asian philosophy and Buddhism. So it wasn't a spectacular day, but it was a good day, right? Sometimes you try new experiments in the classroom, and I've flopped a few times trying to have a birthday for Confucius when I was teaching in China. So all the students are just like, "Well, what are we supposed to do?" But I learned from my mistakes. So the second year, though, I created a live action role playing game featuring Confucius and actually had a whole bunch of characters in it where each student has a role in the game and they make arguments to try to win for their cause. And so anyway, I'm influenced by that style of pedagogy too. Which is sometimes called LARPing, live action role playing. And I think students engage more rather than just try to memorize stuff. They have to speak and make arguments and negotiate with others. And that gives people practice defending their ideas in a public forum, which I think is what good philosophy does, right? How do you back up and it may be abstract stuff like physician assisted suicide, but it may be, okay, I'm getting pulled over by a policeman because he says I did, like what is reasonable to present as evidence. The best philosophy is interested in evaluating evidence. And for this reason, I know that that people have been reporting this for 3 decades that philosophy majors, people sometimes joke like, "You want fries with that?" Right? It's like, not a lot of jobs in philosophy, right? So if you're a parent, no, my kids are going to be a philosopher. But I mean, you have to really want philosophy to um, to really pursue it, I think. But anyway, uh, uh, but trying to get students to think critically is very difficult
Yeah.
because you say, "Hey, I want you to draw your own conclusions. Is this on the test?" Yeah, the test of your life. And so I think all educators really want that, their students to be able to reason, but that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to do. One of my karate students, he's a very good student, but he doesn't practice very much, right? He knows the techniques, but if you don't practice, right, I think that at some level, having curiosity really helps. And one of the questions I have for you, which I don't know the answer for, is how do you make people curious? I remember we had like a faculty forum on this, like the value of intellectual curiosity. And I think if people are intellectually curious, they're likely to they're likely to find out more stuff, right? A few years ago, I won a prize. I won a cash prize for this essay on why students cheat. And according to different majors, students cheat at different levels, which I found surprising. And it turns out business majors cheat at a much higher rate than non-business in both empirical studies as well as self-reported cheating. People like Linda Trevino and others have shown that like there's both self-reported cheating and students at the MBA level, something like 60% of them claimed for that they cheated, right? And so I was really curious, well, why do people cheat? And I think when people are more intellectually curious, they really want to know the answer, not just like, is this on the test? I'll memorize it and forget it. And so that's something I've been working against, trying to figure out how to get students not just to what it is called bulimic learning. There's this book by Ken Bain, What the Best Teachers Do, where he refers to bulimia, right? Where people will like, that's a eating disorder where you eat, and then you throw up and vomit. And so whatever nutrition you had in that food, there's no way you could absorb it, right?
Mhm.
Um, but Ken Bain is like, all right, let's try to figure out how to break free from the model of bulimic learning, the same way that you wouldn't get anything from the nutrition of food that you put in yourself and threw up. I've experienced that a lot with students. Well, I say, don't you remember this? This was at the beginning of the semester, right? And I just had final exams where we did things with, there's this thing where Confucius, the Buddha, and Lao Tzu meet and taste vinegar. And we covered it. It was really easy first week. Get to the last week, and some of this, like, yeah, we knew that at the beginning of the semester. We don't know it now. I'm like, what? So I'll pretend to teach, you pretend to learn. No, I don't want to pretend to teach. I don't want you to pretend. I want you to learn. So if you memorize all this stuff and then at the end of the semester you don't know any of it, right? I mean, did you really learn anything, right? If you forgot. So anyway, those are some of the issues I've been struggling with because I'd like to make a difference and
Mhm.
make students' lives better. But it's hard to know how to teach critical thinking.
Yeah,
I,
it is. It is. And I
I
don't know the answer to that question, how to teach them to be curious or to become curious. I think the curiosity is sort of inside of us, and then it could flourish, or could die with no water and no nourishment. I think, but I'm sure there is a more scientific way of looking at curiosity, and there are probably methods to encourage and expand.
Well, if there are, I would like to know them, right? Because, one of the tricky things is there's this old fact value distinction, right? Facts are different than values. And there's a branch of philosophy called axiology. Some of my Chinese sponsors run this journal, Axiology and Ethics, that I published a few things in. But it's hard to study values and to make sense to talk about values because you can't see them or verify them, but they're kind of real, right? Even though you can't smell them or touch them or hear them. And like what you value has a lot to do with what you wind up doing and what you wind up seeking out. So I would like to know if there are better ways to get people to, because it almost seems like if you have to program people, then you're coercing them and indoctrinating them or doing something. I think individuals have to genuinely be curious. You could fake curiosity, but then that's not really curiosity, right? And so I remember seeing this design of what some faculty member wrote something express your value of curiosity by this exercise. And it's like, okay, like is that like telling someone like when someone does something bad, say you're sorry. No, say you're sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. And they don't mean it, right? Like, so jump through these sort of formulaic hoops to demonstrate that you have intellectual curiosity, right? And I don't know how to get people curious about stuff. And I hope that you're right. If there are ways to teach people how to become curious, I would like to know more about that.
Well, I know that you are a man of many interests and many hobbies, and you play music and you record music. Let's talk about your music and perhaps play um, some music after the interview. Can we do that?
Okay. Oh, you caught me off guard. I have a guitar here, actually. I have a guitar in every room. Um, yeah, I'm not a great musician, but I write a lot of songs. And when I was living in Las Vegas, where, by the way, they do have required critical thinking as a class when I was at UNLV in Las Vegas, Nevada, for everyone, right? And there was a professor there, by the way, who said, I don't think I can teach critical thinking. I can show, it's like taking a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Like, okay, here's how we evaluate arguments. Here's how you diagram arguments. But when I was in Las Vegas, I wound up going to this thing where I signed something, emerging artists and talent in music, and there's this big trade show, and I had a CD at the time, so I showed up. And in the 90s, most people, there wasn't no one had home recording studios, and that's a product of the early 21st century. So just having a CD well, like gave me some kind of instant cred. So I signed something with the Orchard Record Company, and then I moved back to New England, and I see my iTunes, my records for sale on it. I'm like, hey, who's gonna sell it? And they said like, oh, in the future we'll sell downloads. I'm like, there's no way anyone's gonna buy music off the internet, right? And but then it turned out so I was lucky to get on the ground floor. So I've created a few albums, and they distribute them around the world. So I had a Chinese live album, Outsourced Live, and also Center of the Universe, featuring such hits as I Killed the Dinosaurs. And more recently, the Connecticut State Troubadour appeared on The Last Object. No one wants objects anymore. Do you even have a CD player, Julia? Almost no one does. So what am I going to do with these? I guess I start giving them out to students. Do you have a CD player? If they do, okay, well, you're taking one. They're like, what? Do I have to? So I got boxes of these things. And in the old days, like just 10 years ago, you could go to a bar or something and say, hey, give me $10 for this, or give me a bite of that sandwich, or or buy me a beverage or something. But now no one wants objects. So that's one thing that's changed in the music industry. Like no one makes, there's very little money to be made on a physical object, right? So it's placed more of a premium in performing live, and because most people don't care, they'll just listen to MP4s or MP3s on the internet, and they don't really care. But all of my records are on YouTube that you can listen to free, or on iTunes and all the major music distributors throughout the world. But anyway, yeah, so that's something I do. And I enjoy playing the tunes. Um, but I'm working on a new song about the Elgin marbles, and perhaps you know of them, right? A very controversial issue in Greece, Athens, Greece, during the occupation of Athens, Greece during the Ottoman Empire.
Mhm.
Elgin showed up, and he's like, "Hey, I just want to smell the. I'm not going to do anything with him. I don't know." But he created up the marbles on the side of the Parthenon. Um, and they're in the English Museum even to this day, right? So I in 2019 I was in the Athens airport or something. My Chinese sponsors flew me to Cairo, and I saw it was like an hour and a half flight to Athens. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll go to Athens. I've never been to Athens, Greece. And it was off the hook. I enjoyed it. But there was like this phone booth, like, vote, should the British Empire and the British Museum return the Elgin marbles? I mean, when they carted them off, right? I mean, they're not tawdry or negligible objects. They're fantastic, right? And and uh and so who who do they belong to, right? It's a philosophy question that Kwame Appiah addresses, the philosopher from Ghana, and to try to understand the fate of art objects that may have UNESCO like world historical value for human beings. Um, and Appiah winds up comparing it to his where he's from originally, his family Kumasi in Ghana, right, where the British did something similar at the end of the 19th century, where they go in and they basically take everything out of the royal palace, and they have things like, medieval vases and precious metals and paintings, some of which was war booty when they took it, right? And so who do all those objects rightfully belong to? Do they should they be in the British Museum? And people in Athens are like, yeah, we want them back, right? But the ancient Greeks, Phidias made them, I think, at the time of Socrates. So we're going back like 2,500 years, a long time, 2,400 years ago or so. He wasn't making them for the modern Greek state. He wasn't maybe making them for Athens, right? Because the modern Greek state is different than he sure as heck wasn't making them for the British, right? So who do they belong to in trying to mediate that cultural dispute? So that's something I've been thinking about, trying to get students to address the idea of thinking beyond national borders, sometimes called cosmopolitan philosophy. And but it's kind of fun, when the Ottomans were occupying Athens, they were using the Parthenon as an armory, which store all your gunpowder there. What could possibly go wrong? Blowing up the Parthenon. So people used to be apologists and like say, well, at least they won't get blown up or destroyed. I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know the song, but I'm gonna rip out this new song.
Okay.
Do you have a guitar pick? Kitty, you have a pick? Uh-oh. All right, here's a song about the Elgin Marble. I shouldn't play this because it's going to be a disaster, but we'll do it anyway. The British looted Kumasi like France was robbed by Nazis. Precious metals in stolen paintings. Give back the stuff that's been taken. Shake your war booty, give it back, 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 back. Shake your war booty, bow, 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 bow. Shake your war booty, give it back. The nation that you idealize has a history that you could realize of exploitation, in subjugation, and hiding stuff. They've been taken. Shake your wall, booty, give it back, 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 back. Shake your wall, booty, bow, 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 bow. Shake your wall, booty. The empire defines possession, leaves the world with a lesson. If they steal it and conceal it, they don't want you to reveal it. Shake your war booty, give it back, 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 back. Shake your war booty, back, 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 back. Shake your war booty, give it back, back, back. No critique of colonialism, nor postmodern colonialism can defend Elgin's theft and the British being deaf. Shake your wall booty, give it. That's a song called Shake Your War Booty. Not a good song. Maybe edit that
Excellent.
out.
This is great, Paul. Thank you so very much. And this is a fantastic song. Send us some links to YouTube and other channels, and we'll play more of your creations.
Okay. Hey, well, thank you so much. I
Thank
hope
you.
I don't know what I was supposed to do in our short time together, but it's nice to see you, and I'm
It's,
I'm delighted that you asked me to
it's
participate in your
excellent.
radio cast.